The moment they stepped inside, a tremendous voice echoed across the room.
Haka. Hey! Where the hell did you guys go?
It was Seven. Ace was right behind him and Clover was behind Ace, although she seemed to be hanging back. It looked as though there was something strange about them. Seven had the look of a man who'd seen a ghost. Ace was just as pale, and Clover looked as though she was only moments from passing out entirely. For a long moment they simply stood there looking at one another. Junpei looked around nervously, waiting for someone else to speak. No one did. He looked at Seven.
What happened? What the hell kind of question is that?
Seven was trying very hard to be angry, but something had shaken him hard. His shoulders were trembling and his voice was strained.
Snake is...
Seven couldn't finish. He just looked away, his face twisted by... Junpei wasn't sure what. Instead, Ace spoke. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and spoke.
The snake is dead. He died just as the ninth man did.
Exclamation mark. It was as if all the air had been suddenly sucked out of the room. Junpei felt his heartbeat quicken and he realized he was having trouble breathing. He could feel cold sweat beading on his forehead and neck. June, Santa and Lotus looked the way he felt. All three were frozen in place, their faces white.
Oh my god, that's not true, is it? We should make sure. Yeah, right, we should.
They nodded to one another and headed for the number 3 door.
Wait! Not that way.
They stopped short and turned to look at Seven. He was pointing at a door with no number.
I stuck a screwdriver in there to keep the door from closing all the way. It's not locked, so you can go in that way. Where is he? Ich habe meine Stimme gerade mit Seven ein bisschen zu sehr verändert. The shower room on the left side of the hallway. Das ist Seven. I put a broom in there too to keep the door open. We can't get in without going through the numbered door, right? We can. Entschuldigung. Yeah, that's right.
The new destination clear, Junpei and his companions headed for the door with no number. Once in the hallway, it was easy to spot the metal door on the left wall. It hadn't been open when they had been through before, but now, just as Seven had said, there was a broom stuck between the door and the frame, keeping it open. They looked at it for a moment, then stepped inside.
Oh, it smells horrible.
Lotus wrinkled her nose and covered her mouth in disgust. Even Santa pinched his nose shut.
Yeah, this is pretty awful. I feel like I'm gonna puke.
It was just as bad as they had said. Perhaps worse. A hideous smell filled the air, so thick they could almost taste it. It was sour and smelled of fish, feces and burnt meat. It worked his way through Junpei's nose and down his throat to pound against the entrance to his stomach. He put his hand over his mouth and struggled to keep what little was in his stomach where it belonged. They didn't have to wonder where the body was. There was blood everywhere, a few arms of this splatter reaching toward them as they walked in through the door. All one had to do was follow the many radial arms to their source. The body itself was hidden behind the divider.
June, you should stay here. But please just do me a favor, okay? Alright?
He didn't give her a chance to say no. He put his hand on her shoulder as if to shove her into the ground like a tent pole, turned and walked toward the end of the divider. It felt like it took an eternity for him to get there. Santa and Lotus followed, timid and nervous as a pair of children. Eventually they reached the divider. They looked at one another and nodded slowly. Junpei put his hands on the divider and peered around the corner. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. He felt his heart collapse in his chest like an empty cigarette carton and time froze. He knew in that instant that he would take the image before him to the grave. What was left of the body sat in a sea of blood. Chunks of flesh torn from the body sat in the blood like tiny islands in a great red sea. A vast ragged hole had been torn in the torso, and what remained of his intestines spilled out of it like fresh spaghetti. Smaller chunks of meat had splattered against the wall and became stuck there as they dried. Globules of yellowish fat had left trails like tiny slugs as gravity pulled them down the wall even as they dried to it.
Just like I said.
Santa's voice was strained. Junpei suspected he was holding down some vomit of his own.
Just like the nymph man.
Ninth.
Oh shit. The detonator in his bracelet set off the bomb in his guts.
It looked as though the explosion had been quite powerful. His legs were both bent in an odd, unnatural way, and his left arm had split open, exposing the painfully white bone of his ulna. His bracelet lay next to him. It seemed to have hit the wall hard enough to have shattered the display, which lay on the ground in pieces. Half of his head had simply collapsed. The blood coating almost made it look like raw pizza, dough covered in tomato sauce. His clothes, too, were covered in blood. The burgundy tie, the white shirt, the jacket with the yellow piping, and the grey slacks. They were all familiar to Junpei.
No mistake about it. No mistake about that. It's Snake.
Lotus's voice was unnaturally deep and strained, and Junpei heard it catch in her throat. The squeal of tortured metal made Junpei's teeth curl. It sounded like the noise a ghost would make. No matter how many times he heard it, he never got used to it. Every time it put him on edge. It didn't help that there was a girl nearby who looked far more like a ghost than a living human should. It was Clover. She sat on the edge of the bed, her head drooping listlessly onto her chest. Her eyes were blank and stared across the room at nothing. Her breathing was slow and mechanical. Aside from the rise and fall of her chest, she didn't move. Junpei felt as even a nudge might cause her to shatter into 1,000 pieces.
Snake was probably murdered. 70, sorry. Chances are he was killed the same way the ninth man was.
Seven lowered his voice, likely in an effort to keep Clover from hearing what he had to say. There were 4 other people in the room with Junpei and Seven: Ace, Santa, June, and Lotus. Seven looked at each one of them in turn and continued.
It's pretty much straightforward. Not that hard to figure out how they did it. First, the killers got Snake. Die Stimme wieder. First, the killers got Snake to authenticate on the rat to open door 3. Then they shoved him into it alone and waited 9 seconds for the door to shut. Once the door shut, it was over for Snake, but he didn't give up. He probably knew it wouldn't do him any good, but he probably ran into the shower room looking for the dead. It was a small chance, but it wasn't like he had anything to lose. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The detonators only deactivated if everybody who authenticated when they went in uses the dead. And then, 81 seconds after he was shoved in, that happened. I see. So that's what you meant by killers, huh? You need at least 3 people to open one of the numbered doors, including Snake. It wouldn't open for Snake and a single killer. Exactly. That means we're looking at multiple perps here.
Junpei crossed his arms and grunted.
Well, just in case I want to make sure. Let's say you're right. When do you think Snake was killed? When we all split up to look for the parts for the rats, I think. Right after that was when we noticed he was gone. Then that means none of us have alibis. We were all off searching the rooms we'd been assigned, looking for those parts. Yeah, that means anybody could be a killer. Wait a minute. What are you talking about?
June seemed shocked.
How can you say one of us is a killer so easily? Well, not just one of us. If I'm right, then at least 2 of us are murderers. Why don't you calm down a bit, Seven? What are you going to gain by being so suspicious? That's what Zero wants, you know. What Zero wants? Exactly. This game was set up by Zero, wasn't it? Any game has a winner and a loser. Whoever makes it through door 9 is a winner, and those who don't are the losers. Zero is trying to make us fight against one another for that victory. Then you're saying that Zero is trying to split us up by making us fight each other? Yes. That's why we can't let ourselves fall prey to suspicion. We have to trust one another and form a strong bond of friendship. Otherwise, we'll end up ensnared by Zero's manipulations. Then does that mean that the person who killed Snake? Yes, almost certainly Zero himself. If there's anyone who we should doubt, it should be Zero. He masterminded the game and kidnapped all of us. Doesn't it seem reasonable that he would have killed Snake as well?
Junpei hadn't really considered that. If Zero had killed Snake, then Zero was on the ship with them. Was Zero still on the ship with them? Junpei wasn't sure. Of course. Of course he was. That was obvious. Zero was somewhere on the ship, but Junpei had no idea where. Junpei mumbled to himself, lost in thought.
Where could Zero be hiding?
Suddenly, everyone went very quiet. The silence was cold and clammy, and Junpei could feel it crawling across his back and around his throat. Again, he heard the ghosting moaning noise, and moments later, a person who looked more ghost than human appeared. It was Clover. She looked at the floor as she spoke, and her voice was a cold monotone.
I think Zero is one of us.
Das Geräusch gerade. Every human body in the room froze. The only sound was the muffled rustling of breath. Eyes started from face to face. One of those faces was the face of the jailer. Face. But who? Junpei? Said?
Well, that's possible. Huh? Like Clover said, Zero might be one of us. What are you saying, Jumpy? Didn't you hear what Ace said? Exactly. I said we shouldn't suspect one another for no reason. No reason? I've got a great reason. And what's that? The bracelets.
He held out his left arm.
Why are the bombs in our bodies connected to the bracelets? You are thinking Zero's hiding somewhere watching us, right? If he's doing that, then he could just detonate the bombs by remote control if someone did something they weren't supposed to do. It would be a lot more precise and a lot easier. But if that's the case, then why is the bomb set off by the detonator in the bracelet? Well, you got a point. I'm not done. Try applying the same ideas to the nonary game. All of the puzzles here run all by themselves. In other words, Zero doesn't have to be controlling them for the game to move forwards. Why is that? Why would Zero bother to do something like that?
Junpei let the question hang in the air and looked at the others. It was Santa who answered.
So let's say you and Clover are right. Zero's one of us. If that's the case, then it'd be really hard for him to keep track of all of us or control anything remotely. That's why all the puzzles run by themselves. That's what you're getting at, right? Yep.
Junpei nodded.
7. When we were talking earlier, you said any of us could be Snake's killer, right? Yeah, something like that. Alright then, I've got a question for you, Ace. You said something like Zero must be the one who killed Snake, right? Yes, something like that. I can't think of any other explanation. So, what do we get if we combine those? They fit together pretty well, I think. Something like this. Whoever killed Snake equals Zero equals one of us. 7 and Ace's theories aren't mutually exclusive. They actually complement each other pretty well. At least they do if Zero is one of us.
No one spoke. The faces were grim, but Junpei wasn't sure if they believed him or not. Finally, Lotus spoke up.
What were his motives? His motives? Yeah. Isn't that pretty important? Why would Zero want to hide as one of us? Oh, well, that's because,
Junpei choked. He hadn't thought of that.
Immediately.
And he had to be honest with himself. He had no idea.
I don't know.
Lotus sighed.
Well, so much for making a persuasive argument, Junpei. In other words, you had only circumstantial evidence.
Order in the court.
Ja, das ist natürlich auch voll an Ace Attorney sofort. I don't really think that's enough to go on, you know?
Junpei was painfully aware of their eyes on him and their disapproval. Wie cool dieses Spiel wäre mit den Ace Attorney Charakteren. Und du hast so Franziska von Karma da drin mit einer Peitsche oder sowas.
Kennst du Danganronpa?
Hat das Ace Attorney Charaktere?
Nee, aber quasi, weil es ja auch dieses Gericht hat.
Das stimmt, das ist das ein bisschen näher dran, ne? Da gibt es ja diese Verhandlungen.
Genau, es hat einen Richter, der auch weird ist, oder es hat einen Bär.
He tried to find something else, anything else to look at. Just when he felt he could bear it no longer. They heard a bell begin to ring. It was the clock at the central staircase, which apparently has been heard from everywhere.
3 in the morning. That means we have 3 hours left. Then we need to move. Now. 7 Clover, Junpei. I know how you feel, but you do understand that right now it's important we trust one another, don't you?
Junpei couldn't bring himself to respond. He swallowed the words he wanted to say inside. 7 and Clover remained similarly silent. Their eyes were looking at something somewhere else very far away.
We must go now. We have very little time left.
Ace's words put their feet to moving. They all knew where they were going. Their next destination was Mercury.
Jeez. Weiter Weg.
To space and beyond. It said, bolted to the wall near the stairs that led to the casino and the kitchen between the 2 elevators.
Oh, das hat gleich einen coolen Warte, what? Oh, nee, sorry, ich dachte das. Ich glaube, der Song hat einen Drop. Ich glaube, wir tauschen mit einem anderen Song.
The Mercury Card Reader. Junpei stood in front of it with the Mercury Key Card.
Da.
Oh, stimmt.
Das ist so toll. Sorry.
7 had given him the card.
I found it when we were checking out the shower room.
At least that's what he'd said. Junpei slid the card through the reader. The light on the reader turned green and made a tiny electronic noise. Now they were ready. Junpei and June had been chosen as the investigators, the reasoning being that they had been to E-Deck before and no one else had. As before, Junpei sent the elevator ahead to make sure the floor they were heading to wasn't flooded. As before, the elevator returned as dry as when they had left. Once it had been checked for water, Junpei and June stepped into the elevator.
Song so toll.
There were only 2 floor buttons they could push. C and bottom buttons. Bottom buttons.
Bottom button.
The rest were destroyed or did nothing when he pushed. Junpei hit the bottom button.
The bottom button.
The door closed. Slowly they began to move downward. Sometime later, Junpei and June stepped off the elevator and onto the bottom deck. They stepped off and saw that the hallway to their right ended somewhere between 20 and 25 feet from them. The hallway in front of them was a dead end, but not a regular dead end.
This is a numbered door. This is the 8th one we found.
There were 2 numbered doors on B deck near the central staircase. They were...
Ja, Flashback,
okay, das muss jetzt nicht unbedingt sein.
5, 6.
Ja, wir wissen's. Es ist auch so ein Ding in dem Spiel, dass dir Sachen sehr...
Ja, allgemein japanische Spiele
immer wieder vorgekaut werden.
Oder auch Anime. Generell japanische Storytelling, habe ich oft das Gefühl, ist... weiß ich nicht, das ist einfach eine andere Art von Storytelling, dass das nicht subtil bleibt.
Ja, auch bei Emotionen wird ganz oft Zeug ausgesprochen.
I am sad. Don't you think the next story find? Do you think the next story find? Yep, I think so. Next one's gonna be door 9.
Despite himself, Junpei felt excited. There was something about that excitement that frightened him as well. He did his best to put it from his mind and headed back to C-Deck with June. ...
Alright.
Sorry.
Let's open these up.
The pieces of paper that folded up lay on the ground next to Junpei's legs. There were 7 of them all told. They were written on paper pulled from Junpei's notebook, and each one bore a code name and a door. Why had they decided to vote that way? They decided it wasn't fair to simply ask everyone at once. That would allow people to force others to go through certain doors. Well, it wasn't the only reason. Junpei had proposed the voting system, and he had a plan. It wasn't a plan he wanted anyone catching wind of, however, so he did his best to act calm as he began to open and read the pieces of paper. The first one read,
Ace requests door 1. Yes, I do. Would you like me to explain why? Nope. We don't have the time for that, sorry. Let's keep going.
Really don't care.
Gibt halt auch wirklich keinen Grund, weil du nicht weißt, was meldet ist.
He opened the second one.
Next is Santa. He wants door 6. Yeah, that's what I wrote.
Nope. Junpei continued with the third, fourth, and fifth pieces of paper.
Clover wants 1, Lotus wants 2, and 7 also wants 2. Wait a minute. There's no way I'm going anywhere with the Elephant Man. Nope, there'd be no point to the voting if we let people change their choices because of stuff like that. But just give it up, Lotus. It's not like I wanna hang out with some exhibitionist grandma. I'm not an exhibitionist.
Aber Grandma ist nicht Object.
Yeah. I'm wearing clothes, kind of. Barely. So? Last I checked, that's not a crime. Maybe, but what about common decency? Nobody wants to have to look at the chick who looks like half-naked raisin. Das machen japanische Anime-Serien auch voll oft, dass sie einen Charakter haben, der irgendwie 30 ist, aussieht wie 21 und behandelt wird, als ob er 60 wäre.
Ja.
Also, hier ist ja auch so. Die sieht ja auch aus wie 23 irgendwie. Also, das absolute Schönheitsideal, aber weil sie irgendwie knapp 30 sein
Vor allem
soll oder
von
so.
ihm wird sie dann
Ja, wird sie mal, ob sie 70 wäre. Es ist so oft den Anime der Fall. I'm going to kill you. Ich sie runterfahren.
And with that, Lotus killed 7. Lotus's hair flared out like the mane of an angry lion, and she roared with a voice that shook the walls. With some difficulty, Ace managed to restrain her.
Junpei, read the rest. Right.
Junpei tore his eyes away and looked down at the sixth piece of paper. He opened it.
June wants door 6. Yeah. I don't really have a reason. I just felt like it.
All of the papers, save Junpei's, had been read. He did some quick calculations in his head.
Alle haben 2.
People who requested door 1, Ace and Clover. This was the door on A deck near the central staircase. People who requested door 2, 7 and Lotus. This was the door on the bottom deck and could be reached by taking the elevator to the bottom of the ship. People who requested door 6, Santa and June. This was the door on E deck and could be reached by taking the elevator near the central staircase down. It took him less than a second to run the numbers. He opened the 7th piece of paper and spoke.
Okay, the last one is mine. I want to go through... Und hier nehmen wir jetzt Door Nummer 6.
Hey, June.
I want to go through door 6.
Junpei flipped open a piece of paper. It read, Junpei, door 6. Of course it did. He'd written it after all.
That's a problem.
June spoke barely above a whisper, but they all knew what she'd said.
None of these teams will be able to go through the doors they want. Clover and I chose door 1. Lotus and I chose door 2. That's not enough people to open a numbered door, however. The digital routes don't match. Sind die plötzlich zu einer Person geworden? Either. We've got similar problems. Junpei and I want to go through door 6, but our digital route is 5. If we're gonna open that door, we need a 1. Damn, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do?
Junpei crossed his arms and did his best to put his thoughts in order. The others followed suit, but with little result.
Dumme Voting-System. Ist doch klar, dass das passiert.
Ja, ich verstehe auch nicht ganz, was das soll. Eventually, Clover broke the silence. Aber Junpei hatte einen Plan.
Why don't 7 and Lotus go through door 1 with me?
Her face was cold and flat, as was her voice, but her logic was sound. 7 and Lotus looked at each other. The first problem resolved, Ace spoke up.
What about me? Isn't that obvious? Wasn't one of the teams just complaining that they didn't have a 1? You mean I should join Santa's team?
Clover nodded, her face still cold and emotionless. Her attitude and posture could not have been more different than the energetic girl of only a few hours before. No one seemed ready to contradict her. Her response was understandable given the horrible situation in which she had found herself, but even so...
I understand. I will go through door 6 then. If we do as Clover suggested, we can all pass through a numbered door. No one will be left behind. This seems to be the most reasonable solution. 7 Lotus, what do you think? What do you guys think? I don't have a problem with it. Me either. Alright then, we're good to go.
Ist nicht me neither.
Hätte ich ja gerade auch gedacht.
At last, Junpei and the other 6 had managed to separate themselves into 2 teams. Clover, Seven, and Lotus headed to A deck, where door 1 was, near the main staircase. Junpei, June, Ace, and Santa, however, took the elevator to E deck.
Hier gleich mal...
Ja, kurz vorm nächsten Raum, würde ich sagen.
Okay.
The ride to E deck was a silent one.
Alright, let's go.
Santa's words jolted them to action, and they stepped out of the elevator into a long, straight hallway. Das klingt ja komisch. Before long, they arrived in front of door 6. One by one, they put their palms over the red. With a soft electronic noise, it authenticated each of them. Und wir sehen uns beim nächsten Mal mit
nice.
Nummer 6.
Sehr, sehr nice.
The door opened.